now works for Ocean County Parks and the Ocean County Cultural Heritage Commission. She's one of our newest employees. She stole her from state parks.
Yeah. They're really bitter about it too.
But Julie is a graduate of Rutgers University. She's working on her master's degree in archiving, and she has a very strong interest in history. She's descended from just about every old family in Tuckerton. And so this is her presentation she put together on the fact of the Revolutionary War and that here. So Julia.
Thank you. Hi everybody. I don't think I got to come last month to the meeting, so it's good to see you guys. This is a project I've been working on and off for a couple of months. I do have a brief background in reenacting, and then thanks to Tim, I got my own kit when I started with the county for some of our events at Cedar Bridge Tavern, and it's just something I think is so interesting, and it's something that there's a lot of mystery around. There's controversy. What is accurate? What's not accurate? Can you call it a costume? The answer is no. Do not tell a reenactor that you like their costume. They usually like it when you call it kit. But anyway, so why study clothing? Why does it matter? I like to figure out why there's a point of studying things that I'm interested in. So when I started to ask why should we look at clothing, it tells us so much about a particular time and place. It tells us about individual people, personalities. They always have and probably always will reflect our self-expression, from the colors we pick to the patterns we choose to wear. They all say something about ourselves that we actively decide to put out into the world. There are means of advertising yourself. Even today, if we see somebody walking around with a Gucci bag, we might think, oh, that's somebody that wants me to know that they have money. But historically, there have always been little signals that clothing puts out to other people in our everyday lives to tell them a little something about ourselves or what our lifestyle is like. So, a couple grains of salt to take with this presentation. I am training to essentially be what's called a preservationist or an archivist. But the examples I have in this presentation are all from the Metropolitan Museum of Art or the Museum of the American Revolution. And a few things about artifacts like these that you find in museums like that are that they're usually still around because they're special, which is great. We get to see something that's exceptionally made or really unique or it's very uncommon. Unfortunately, that can mean that what we're looking at is not the average everyday version of that thing. So there's a couple things in here that really stick out, and I think most of you will be able to know them when you see them. Things that we ourselves save today, like wedding dresses. I'm getting married in February, and I know my dress is going to be preserved forever. Why? I don't really even know. It's not like I'm ever going to wear it again. I'm not going to give it to anybody that I know of, but there are certain things that we save because of sentimentality like that. There are certain things that we save because of their value. You know, you wouldn't spend $5,000 on a gown like that and then say, well, why don't you just give it away? Or maybe you would. That's really cool of you. But sometimes people save things just because they're valuable. So it's just to say that some things that I'm going to show might not be as the commonplace for the colonial Americans. So I'd like to start with fabrics. These are some of the most common fabrics of the era. They are mainly silks and satins, cottons, linen, and wool, excuse me. They are all very practical. They all serve a purpose, and they all say different things about the people wearing them. we'll get more into that in a minute, but some of the benefits of each of these. Silk is really soft, as we know. We still wear it today. It's very luxurious. Cotton, soft, breathable. I'm sure you've all heard the commercial. It's the fabric of our lives. Linen is extremely breathable. It's great for summer. We still wear it in the summer today. I would hate to wear it in the winter because it's so light and breathable, but again, everything has a purpose. And then wool is the opposite. It's waterproof, it's warm, it's heavy, it's good for cold weather. So what do fabrics say? Because it's not just patterns and the cuts of dresses or phrases on t-shirts that say things to the world when we wear them. Historically, the fabrics can say a lot about people. So here we have a silk men's suit. What does it say? I'm probably richer than you, just thought you should know. What about a homespun linen gown? Stick it to the British man. And we'll go into that. A printed cotton gown, nice and floral. I'm up to date on the latest London fashion. A linen bedgown or a short gown like I'm wearing, this blue piece. I have so much work to do. And a wool cloak, bring on the cold and rain, I'm ready. So, homespun fabrics were kind of a big deal for the colonial Americans. Homespinning fabric is essentially homemade fabric. There are certain things that make it very obvious to somebody looking at it that it is homespun. For one, it's not as consistent, so when you see homespun linen, it might have sort of pilling, or the weft and the weave might be noticeably thicker or thinner than each other. It doesn't hold dye as well, so it doesn't have those vibrant colors. It's not that good for print patterns. The most important thing about them is that sometimes they were considered a statement piece in colonial America. So something about homespinning is that its origins came as kind of a direct result of British taxation, which we're very familiar with as people that care about the Revolutionary War. British taxation caused a lot more problems than just the Boston Tea Party. One of the taxations on textiles started in the 1760s or a little bit earlier, and it really bothered a lot of people. So to wear homespun fabric was kind of a way of saying, I'm not paying for this, I'm not willing to pay this tax to the British Crown, I'll just make my own. And again, it was very easy to tell when something was homespun, so it's kind of a pretty clear statement. Whereas across, buying fabrics from the manufacturer not only said that you could afford the British provided textiles, but maybe you don't mind that your money is going to the crown. Maybe you're a loyalist and that's where you want your money to go. Printed cotton fabric was also inextricably linked to British trade in India and the East, because that's where printed cottons originated. So they're kind of like a symbol of British enterprise, colonialism, and you know, most people in the American colonies followed the British styles, but they start to change for reasons that start to give Americans their own unique identity. And you know, when people got dressed in the morning, this is not to say that they were getting up with the intention to say, I'm going to make every loyalist I walk past really mad today because I made my fabric. I don't think they were thinking that way, but it's interesting as from a historical perspective to look back and think that this is all information that we might be able to gather just based on looking at people's clothes. So exceptions to the rules and unique identities. The last slide said most colonials, their style was based on the British styles and what was popular. but they do start to differentiate for a couple pretty important reasons. The first is climate. If you are living in South Carolina and it's midsummer, you're not going to be wearing whatever the folks in Yorkshire are wearing at the same time. Britain is notoriously rainy, it's pretty cold. I was in Scotland 2 Novembers ago and I've never been so cold in my life. And I've been to Canada in February. It's colder. So this is one thing. And the other thing is that we were surrounded by different cultures at the same time. So we do start to get different pieces to our clothing and different styles. So Linda Baumgarten is the author of What Clothes Reveal, which is a fantastic book on this exact subject. She's a costume historian, which I am not, but I was able to take a lot of quotes from her. So she says, while Anglo-American colonists generally adhered to English styles, environmental conditions in America were different from those in the British Isles. During the hot summer months in the South, even the gentry resorted to lighter, less formal clothing. And then our neighbors come into play as well. So both the English and Americans encouraged foreign travelers with natives having different cultural values and shared familiarity with imported and exotic goods. Although some people accepted discrete clothing elements or materials from other cultures, few adopted foreign styles wholesale, even those that might have been considerably more practical or comfortable. Historians point out that clothing choice is ordered by cultural standards, what is considered appropriate wear for a given person in a particular place and time. So a couple examples. Wool in the British spring might be too hot. In South Carolina at the same time. And then at the bottom I have another example. A British lady might have a French accessory that she got in Paris, a colonial man might trade for Native American furs. And that just shows what we accept and what we come to think of as commonplace or acceptable to wear based on who we surround ourselves with or who we're surrounded by. So, the issue of opulence comes up. This is a lot, and this is very informal. So, how much is too much? Differences in opinion on how opulent clothing should be arose first between the English and the French, and then between the English and the Americans. So, at the left side of the screen is the British robe à l'anglaise, which is just English dress in French, and the one on the right is a robe à la française. Same thing, it's a French dress. But you can see that one is very clearly more than the other. The back of the French style has this kind of capelet thing happening. And it's evocative of regal appearance, regal attire. Plus you have all these bows, all these frills. There's a lot going on. The shape, the cut of the dress is specifically to accommodate for a specific type of like a bustle, if you will, that accentuates the feminine shape, the hips, and eventually over time, the English come to think of this as just excessive. So obviously, they start to develop their own identity in their dress. They're not doing what the French are doing anymore. Same with men's clothes. We see cultural exchange in clothing. So on the left, there's a very, very extra sort of number here. It's literally got spun gold in it. It's wool, and then it's French. So in the middle, the British suit is really pretty plain. It's all one color. There's no bells and whistles. It's what you need, nothing you don't. And that was because of a national identity coming into play through clothing. The British came up with this sort of medium through clothing to say, we don't need to be excessive and opulent and have too much. We don't really need to be haughty like that. But then something interesting happens in the later half of the 18th century where the French start taking some ideas from the British. So I have an interesting quote here from the Met. The British aesthetic during the 18th century tended to veer away from the ostentatious French styles being worn at the same time. The textiles were more somber, the silhouettes more simple, and the fashion more basic, while decoration and elaborate textiles flourished in France. Interestingly, nearing the end of King Louis XVI's reign, the simple English styles were adopted by some Frenchmen in an attempt to publicly express their rage towards the aristocracy. So essentially what it's saying is this is like the clothing equivalent to a response to a statement like let them eat cake, which Marie Antoinette never said, but it's fine. But it's again, just like that homespun silk, it's a way to say, I don't need your like symbols of aristocracy and your symbols of being quote unquote better than me because of class or whatever. So it's just interesting that your neighbors can kind of give and take with fashion from you. Okay, so this is the fun part. Parts of dress. I'm going to go from the inside out because that's the way we have to do it. So in order for a lady in colonial America to get dressed, you need about a half hour. That's how long it took me today, which is a record. Sometimes it's more like 40 minutes, but you start with the shift. So the shift is the closest functionally to underwear that it gets. This is the layer that goes directly against your skin to absorb sweat. It's almost always linen because again it's super breathable. What you're going to want to do from there is put your stockings on, and this is a really good example of something that might have been preserved because it was like exceptionally pretty. Most stockings didn't have elaborate embroideries on them, but they are very beautiful. You're going to want to put your shoes on after that because pretty soon you will not be able to bend over. So if there are any married ladies in the room who remember somebody, like maybe your mom, telling you put your shoes on before the dress because you won't be able to find your feet if you put it on first. Same thing. So then you have stays. Stays are the precursor to corsets, and they are infinitely better, and they make infinitely more sense. Stays are designed so that you can put them on by yourself. It's a pain, but you can do it yourself. A corset, everything's in the back. You really need some help with it. But this is what holds you in, and it's also what you end up pinning every outer layer onto because there's no buttons, there's no zippers. It's very rare that you get a button, unfortunately. And then you have your petticoat. So the petticoat is my purple layer here. Move over here a little bit. So these are the stockings. These ones are silk fiber. This is the shift. This is the petticoat. And then your gown is going to go over that petticoat. But it's a lot of layers. After that, if you've gotten through it, where's my little cookie bit? If you've gotten through all that, you can put your gown on, which we're going to see in the next slide because there's a lot of variation. And then on top of your gown, mine in this case is the blue piece that's kind of short. Over that, you're going to put an apron because you might be doing some dirty things like gardening or working by a fireplace, etc. Oh, no, I skipped something important. Ladies, we used to get pockets. Now we never get pockets, but we used to. So you get a pocket that goes under the petticoat. The petticoat ties in the front and the back. So it forms a little triangle space where you can reach through and get to your handy little pocket. So you can put pins in this because you always need them to hold yourself shut and hold your little bonnet on your head. But it's pretty spacious. I can't even fit my phone in my pants pockets, but I could fit about 3 in this thing. I don't know where we went wrong. I don't know what happened. And then you have a neckerchief that covers the clavicle area because it was considered immodest to show that part of the skin. And a bonnet because it's a universal historical opinion that arises across different cultures that hair is a very tangible expression of femininity, sensuality, sometimes mystic powers, depending on where you are in the world. So it was considered appropriate to cover as much of your hair as possible. To have it down and around was considered fairly immodest. And then when you're out and about, you get this cute little straw hat. That's not squished. That's actually how flat they are. Nobody sat on it. That's just how they look. I do have a little video that I'm going to skip for tonight. I will show the video on the menswear since we're at an SAR meeting, not a DAR one. But if anybody wants to see this one, I could send you the link. I figured I would be the visual aid for the ladies' stuff tonight. But I do have to talk about gowns because they were absolutely beautiful. There are so many different variations in gowns. We kind of don't think about variety when we think of any historical period in fashion. We typically think, oh, everybody wore the same thing, nobody got to choose anything, but in the colonial period there was quite a bit of choice. So the reason I chose this one on the left, it is fancy. I believe this is a wedding dress. It's interesting that it was from the 1740s but altered 30 years later. It's kind of indicative that it might have been a hand-me-down or something that became an heirloom for a family. But the reason I chose it was because this style is the most typical. Going back to that robe anglaise, the English style, it has this piece in the middle under the strings called a stomacher. And it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's a kind of triangular piece of thick fabric that goes over your stomach or your abdomen, and you pin it to the stays so it stays in place. And then the gown itself kind of goes on like a jacket. Like you put your sleeves in and you bring it to the front. Then you would pin it to the stomacher, or in this case, you could lace it shut. And then you can kind of sort of see the petticoat underneath. Typically for an everyday woman, they wouldn't be matching fabrics, but again, that's a fancier dress. This is a reproduction from Samson Historical, and it is what I have on, this blue layer. This is called a short gown or a bed gown. They're like the Colonial sweatpants. You would clean your house in them. You wouldn't really want to be seen out and about in polite society with them on. But they're hotly debated, especially among reenactors, because there are historical accounts of people coming from Britain and saying that they arrived in Boston and there were all these women walking around in their short gowns. And it's partially attributed to how hot it is, again, but they are considered very informal, which is perfect for me if I'm at Cedar Bridge, if I'm working a fireplace or whatnot, and I need to keep my customers happy. I can't be tripping over these frilly sleeves. And then the one on the right is very unusual. This is actually a separate top and a skirt. I don't actually know how common that ensemble kind of ended up being for the time, but I didn't see many like this, and when I did, they were not matching like this. But it, again, just to say, we can never really assume what was common, what was used, what wasn't used, because we just don't have a lot of this stuff left. But How many pieces? A lot, too many, infinite, take your pick, too many. This is the stomacher I was talking about. This one is incredibly old. I couldn't believe it was still preserved. It's from 1710. But it's beautiful. It's embroidered, it's fabulous. But again, pretty uncommon. Usually the stomacher was just a solid color that matched the outer fabric of the gown. And then this is just another one that shows that you could have a top and a skirt. But in this case, the skirt part is another petticoat, like my purple layer. That one is French though. So we should talk about menswear since it's obviously our okay, so these are just some fabulous suits. I personally really like this one in the middle. I think it's pretty jazzy. The one on the left is from circa 1780. It's silk. It has metallic thread. You can kind of see that shine on it. The one in the middle is silk, linen, and cotton. Went for a grand slam. And the one on the right is silk and linen. But parts of the men's dress are really, really fun. Okay, so again, you're going to start with that shift or chemise piece because it's the layer that's going to soak up all your sweat and the colonial heat with no air conditioning. You're going to put your stockings on after that, just like the ladies do. Then you're going to put your shoes on because, again, you don't really have a lot of space to be bending over. So then it starts to get a little bit different. The men have stockings just like the ladies, but whereas ladies would tie them up with ribbon, men usually get these little thin leather bands that hold their socks up. They are made of typically the same material, silks or wool for cold weather. The heel is a little bit lower than the ladies until a certain point. When they started to get a little higher, I'm sure everybody's heard the song Yankee Doodle and the mention of macaroni. I'll come back to that. It's a whole other animal. It could be its own presentation. Your pants are your breeches. So, it needs to be said, no, you usually don't get underwear. The breeches are, actually these aren't super typical, but we will see a typical example in the next one. They're usually linen, same like everything else, but they normally don't have the buttons the way we would consider like where a zipper would be. They usually have this flap that does flap things. You'll see. You'll see. You don't want me to talk about it. You'll just have to see. So, and then you get a vest, this very lovely waistcoat. This is a really good example of something that was not the normal everyday. I can't imagine how much something like that would cost now, let alone in the colonial period. But it is American, it's silk. That goes over your chemise shirt. And then over that, you get your coat or your jacket. This one is obviously a military coat. It's from 1776. It was owned by Colonel William Taylor from a Connecticut regiment. And then you either get a stock or a cravat. The cravat went in and out of style a lot, but basically the point of it is to cover your sort of clavicle area, the same as the neckerchief does. The stock was more popular. That's Mr. Jefferson repping his. And then on your head, you get a powdered wig if you're upper class. And everybody was pretty fond of the tri-corner hat. Keeps your face out of the sun. It also filters the rain off if it's really coming down. Would you like to see a video of the, okay. He will explain. You'll see about this flap. I just really don't want to try to use words for it.
You were a sailor.
It's a drop front.
I'm not sure how to make it through. Oh, so actually, I might have to send this to anybody that wants it because Catherine's right, we're not connected to the internet and I completely forgot about that. But it's totally worth it. The gentleman being dressed here, you would think that he was afflicted with some kind of ailment that makes it so he physically cannot lift a finger because this guy, the poor guy doing all the work for him, is running around bending over backwards to put all his clothes on, and he's just eating grapes. It's quality video. It's from the Liverpool National Museum. It's only 5 minutes long. You can find it on YouTube, but I do apologize for that. One thing that I do really want to talk about briefly is the hunting shirt. The hunting shirt is cool because it truly is unique to the American colonies. It's this sort of floppy number on the side. We do have a couple depictions of it in art from the period. This is a quote from the Museum of the American Revolution. A uniquely American garment, that originated in the Virginia backcountry. It was thought to evoke the dress of Native Americans. As stories of the rifleman's marksmanship spread, General Washington saw a psychological advantage in outfitting thousands more of the American soldiers in these distinctive shirts. On July 24th, 1776, Washington wrote that he, quote, earnestly encouraged the use of hunting shirts, in part because they were justly supposed to carry no small terror to the enemy, who think every such person a complete marksman. So this is one of those things that, really reminds you that the American patriots were just a ragtag bunch of people who wanted to change their situation. They had no training before Lafayette came in and Van Stuyven to kind of whip them into shape, but they hunted the back south, and that gave them an advantage on their own terrain, and this is what they were doing it. So again, this is another example of a piece of clothing that became so strictly tied up with identity that it legitimately scared the British to death. They started to associate this shirt, this floppy little deal, with somebody that could absolutely kill them. So it's just an interesting thing to think about. And then finally, I find it would be extremely inappropriate to not mention the hardships of enslaved peoples during the Revolutionary War. And just to briefly explain, like everything else, like every other situation that enslaved people were in the colonies here, their clothing was not equal to that of European Americans. They were typically ordered clothes to work in twice a year, if that. Occasionally, they were made to spin their own fabric for the slower off-season if there wasn't as much of a harvest to do or anything that happened out in the field. They were typically flax, linen, or coarse wool, usually unbleached, and because it's unbleached, it has this like natural sort of off-brown color, which also makes it an unofficial sort of uniform. So it also is another one of those things that people wearing it, you know what they do, you know what their station is, and you know where they stand in society, quite frankly. Linda Baumgarten says about that, there was a sameness and recognizability in the clothing of field hands, adding that advertisements for self-emancipated slaves often made reference to the common dress of field slaves. So there's something that being a field hand as an enslaved person, there's something about the way you dress that tells everybody else sort of what you are. And then, I don't know what happened there, sorry about that. And then just, this is from encyclopediavirginia.org. It is a state historical site. The fabrics tended to be inferior, with enslavers using whatever was most cost-effective. Homespun Virginia cloth and imported Osnaburg fabric Osnaburg is now modern-day Germany. Made from flax and hemp were common in the 18th century. By the 19th century, with the rise of cotton production and industrialization, jean cloth became more common and allowed allowed enslavers to provide clothing that was untailored and ready-made, which was not the norm. If you had a dress or any article of clothing at this time, you probably made it tailor-made for you, or you paid a tailor to do it. Most common practice was to distribute clothes in twice-a-year allotments, with uniformed and domestic enslaved laborers receiving higher quality clothing than field hands, who wore the plainest and coarsest clothing. I do recommend this site. It's got some really interesting quotes on it. They do have a ledger of Thomas Jefferson's in which he's ordering fabric for his enslaved people, and it kind of shows you what people who owned enslaved people were willing to pay for. Jefferson was kind of notorious as a slave owner, so it's interesting to see those documents. But other than that, thank you so much. These are some fabulous family fits. I really like Martha's really nice dress there. But thank you so much for everything.